When people think of Great Britain, what often comes to mind is a picture of wealth. Once the largest empire in the world, Britain has been a rich country for many years. But what often goes unnoticed is scenes like this. This is Jaywick, one of the poorest towns in the UK, full of derelict houses and littered streets. But what's strange is that it's just a 2-hour drive from London. But these two places seem worlds apart. That's because for almost its entire history, and especially today, the United Kingdom has been dealing with the issue of inequality, which is slowly but surely tearing the UK apart. This can be easily shown on this map here, which shows incomes in Britain varying by region. We can clearly see that those living in London or the South East earn significantly more than the rest of the country. Of course, those in a city would expect to earn more, but it's not just that the southern parts of the UK are richer. If you're from the south, you're more likely to have a better education, higher quality healthcare, and actually live longer. All countries have regional differences. States in the American Deep South are poorer than those in New England, and in Germany, Bavaria is richer than the Brandenburg. But Britain is in a class of its own, and the gap between the richest and poorest parts is wider than any EU country. Incomes per head in inner London are 5 times as high as in the Welsh Valleys or Cornwall. And in fact, if you remove the UK's richest region, London, from the mix, then not only would Britain rank far lower than if you did this with countries like Germany or the Netherlands, but it would make it poorer than America's poorest state, Mississippi. A generation and a half of high inequality poses risks not only to the UK's prosperity, but also to its social fabric and democracy. This persistent inequality has fueled feelings of discontent and frustration amongst many citizens, who struggle to make ends meet despite working hard. As wages remain stagnant and the cost of living rises, some people more than ever have turned to blame migrants, seeing them as competitors for scarce resources and opportunities. These tensions have contributed to the sense of alienation and anger, making the UK today feel more than ever like a tinderbox ready to explode. Recent riots and unrest reflect deep-seated grievances that stem from economic disparities, showing how a problem like inequality, which many choose to ignore, undermines social cohesion and provokes unrest. And addressing these issues is crucial to ensuring a more equitable and stable Britain for everyone. So how on earth did the UK become so unequal? And why is it slowly destroying the nation? An issue at the centre of the UK right now has been Keir Starmer talking about the economic mess that they've inherited from the Tory party. But this, like any issue, is open for interpretation. So to help me research this topic, and other points in the video, I've been using Ground News, who I'm really happy to announce are the partners of today's video. Media has become ever more polarised and falsified, but with Ground News, when researching an article, I can see the number of sources, and also the distribution of the political bias. Each source is given a factuality rating, which feeds into the article's overall score. Like the aptly named Independent being owned by the son of a Russian billionaire oligarch. With over 50,000 sources, you can follow specific topics worldwide to uncover stories mainstream media may not be covering. So if you would like a bias-free approach to news, then you can scan the QR code or go to ground.news/invisible, where our viewers will get a special 40% off the Vantage plan I use to get unlimited access to all their features. Click the link in the description to find out more. Inequality in the UK is not a recent phenomenon, and there has been a sort of north-south divide existing in Britain for most of its history. But especially in modern times, this has got wider and wider. The UK, much like the rest of Europe, was characterised by a feudal system, where land was concentrated amongst the aristocracy, and peasants who worked the land had very few rights. And this didn't really begin to change until the Industrial Revolution. Britain was at the forefront, and pioneered inventions like the spinning jenny and the steam engine. This started in the Midlands and Northwest, focusing on textiles, coal mining, iron and steel, and heavy engineering, which meant that for a while, most of northern Britain was actually richer than the south, as manufacturing became a major employer, whereas the south of England actually relied on agriculture, which was generally less wealthy. The exception to this rule was of course London. being the economic hub for well over 500 years as the seat of the monarchy and government. Being closer to Europe, it developed as a crucial hub for trading and financial services, seeing a growing number of jobs in banking and finance as the British Empire grew rapidly, meaning the southeastern areas around London also shared some of this success. But by the 20th century, things were starting to change. The industrial might of the north was fading, and light industry and service began to grow in the south. After World War II, the UK grew rapidly again, fueled by reconstruction and strong exports of things like textiles and metal. And by 1955, it was one of the most industrialised economies in the world. Despite this, regional disparities persisted, and this period marked a clear economic shift towards the south. In 1966, UK industrial employment peaked at 11.5 million jobs, and since then it has declined rapidly. Titans of industry, like British Leyland, have vanished from the map, and when this was accelerated by Margaret Thatcher, Britain began to shift to a more service-based economy. The problem was that services were already strong in London and the South East, and now they were getting stronger, whilst manufacturing jobs kept being taken away from the northern areas. Bit by bit, money and investment was slowly moving away from northern Britain and toward the south. Since the 1980s, regional economic inequality has been rising in most industrialised economies, but the UK stands out for how far this has developed. By the 2010s, the UK had become one of the most regionally unequal countries in the industrialised world in terms of GDP per capita, productivity, and disposable income, driven in large part by its exceptionally rapid deindustrialisation and the rise of finance and business services. This shift has left many former industrial and mining towns like Sunderland, Rotherham, Hartlepool, and Middlesbrough grappling with economic stagnation and high unemployment. As industries declined, wages stagnated, leaving workers feeling left behind. And the lack of economic opportunity in these areas has fostered feelings of resentment and frustration, which has been exacerbated by the perception that migrants are competing for limited resources and jobs. It's therefore no surprise that many of these former industrial towns were the centre of the UK's most recent riots. And discontent has slowly but surely, amongst other factors, contributed to social unrest and now ugly displays of violence. The scale of this issue has developed a new term in British politics, levelling up. That is bringing up other regions in the UK to similar levels as the South East. As we mentioned, incomes in London are significantly higher than in the rest of the UK, as many former industrial towns have never really fully recovered from pit and factory closures. One of the reasons for the continued difference is to do with the stark differences in productivity across the UK. Productivity is the efficiency with which goods and services are made using inputs, usually capital or labour. And due to its service-based labour market, London has historically been far more productive than the rest of the UK. And it's these productivity rates, rather than levels of employment, which is really driving the difference now. If you are more productive and create a greater output for your employer, then chances are, on the whole, you're going to receive a higher salary. And productivity in the UK has been growing apart for a number of reasons. Firstly, education. In decades gone by, it's been thought that higher levels of higher education attendance would translate directly into greater productivity. After all, human capital is a key input in modern economic activity, and the UK's lower productivity regions have low levels of education amongst the workforce. But a university degree doesn't guarantee that you are more productive. A study done in this paper here looks at the term wage premium in different regions. That is, the extra wage someone with a graduate degree can earn versus someone without one. With the logic being that if this premium is high, then graduates are in greater demand as they can get paid more. What they found was that apart from in London, the premium has fallen drastically, suggesting university degrees are not as valuable as they once were, except in STEM subjects, that is science, technology and maths, which have a higher premium. This all suggests that the solution isn't simply more people going to university. And another vital element of the disparity in productivity is the UK's transport systems, or the differences in them. Spending per head is currently far higher in London and the South East than the rest of the country, despite these areas already being better off. Of course, cities like London have far higher levels of poverty, crime and unemployment than, say, a country village, so a higher spend may seem reasonable. But an area where it really could spend more is transport. As we can see, underinvestment in transport is really making the North suffer. This is because a crucial determinant of a region's productivity is the size of its city region that has good transport, allowing a frequent and low-cost interaction between people. And this makes sense. If workers and customers can both get to major hubs easily, then productivity should rise. The UK has spent relatively little on transport infrastructure in recent decades, and amongst the lowest of any OECD countries on roads. And what money has been spent, including a recent surge in rail spending, has gone disproportionately to London and the South East. This was best illustrated with HS2, a high-speed rail network which would reduce the time of trains from London to the Midlands and Manchester by around 30%. But the issue is, these train lines already exist and work okay, whereas lines connecting West to East England are in far better need of investment and would yield more productivity gains by improving east-west connectivity. The UK's large cities outside London also have smaller and more congested road networks than comparable American cities, and more limited public transport accessibility than Western European cities. The poor level of transport means that the effective size of these cities and the pool of workers is much smaller than in other countries, which costs the UK an estimated £23 billion each year, as businesses and workers don't have access to high-quality jobs and talent alike. For instance, Rome and Manchester are the same size, but Rome is 55% more productive, partly because of a much larger share of its workforce that can travel into the city centre by public transport. Another problem with cities in the UK in particular is of course cost of living, but in a slightly different way, which is creating an odd phenomenon, where people are actually flowing out of London instead of into it, due to the high housing costs which erode the real incomes of people who want to move there, apart from if you're in a top income bracket. London has effectively become a separate country, with stronger job links to the international labour market than it does to the rest of the UK. In the past, this sort of employment growth, seen in the capital between 2010 and 2016, would have sucked in workers from regions all around the UK. But during the post-recession period, the number of UK-born workers living in London actually dropped by 320,000. These people were driven out of the capital by overcrowding and rocketing property prices. Instead, they moved to the home counties and commuted into London, which, as we saw before, with the existing poor public transport provision, is a problem. Aside from costing the UK billions in productivity gains and economic growth, you may be wondering why this is such a big issue. Well, ultimately it is damaging the social cohesion and democracy of the UK. High inequality leads to a sense of social subordination, where vast segments of the population feel marginalised and disconnected from the wider society. This breeds resentment, erodes trust, and fosters divisions that weaken the communal bonds essential for a healthy society. When people perceive themselves as being unfairly disadvantaged, it not only diminishes their sense of belonging and participation in civic life, but also undermines the democratic principles that rely on equality and shared purpose. Success for Britain does not look like becoming America. Despite being far richer, the past decade in the US has shown that the dangers to democracy from being the most unequal advanced economy in the world, and there is nothing economically or democratically sustainable about a UK status quo that saw almost 4 people experience destitution in 2022. And the UK needs to be as serious about reducing inequality as it is about boosting growth. The hard truth for Britain is that these things take time. When the Berlin Wall fell, East Germany was far poorer and less productive than the West, and this took decades of planning and careful investment to get to a point where the two regions are more equal. The truth is that it is possible for the UK to become more equal, but it won't happen on its own, and will take careful planning from many governments to come.